Hello and welcome to My Matters. My name's Ethan,
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
and today we are recording our 20th episode. And we also have another very special guest, Sushant. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sushant, and I'm a senior at Glenbrook North.
Yeah, so Sushant's on the podcast today because we're trying to, get a bunch of high schoolers on our podcast to talk about mental health. Because, our goal with every episode is to alleviate and get rid of the stigma around mental health. So big props to Sushant today for coming on our podcast, only the second one. And we recognize a lot of times for high schoolers, it's difficult to talk about mental health. Obviously, David Arts last time had a great story to tell, and I'm sure Sushant will have a lot of great things to say today as well. So today's topic is insecurities. And in many ways, it's very similar to our inferiority complexes episode, which is another great episode with just us three. But we're kind of going to go more in depth into the struggles that people experience with inferiority complexes and insecurities today. So the opening question I want to ask all of you, and we can go around and say our definitions, is how would you define what an insecurity is? And to me, in my experience, an insecurity is when someone has the belief that they're inherently worse or subpar in something that those around them notice, value, or even might judge them for. Kabir, Ethan, Sushant, do any of you guys have definitions you want to share?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
so
think,
Go ahead, Ethan. Go ahead.
yeah, okay. So I think an insecurity is anything about yourself or your identity that you just lack confidence in. And I think at least for me, it tends to be areas where I don't really need to lack confidence. It's just fine, but I kind of feel like it inherently worse whenever I'm in a different setting. Kabir?
yeah, for me, insecurity really feels like almost like the deprivation of choice or agency in your life. So you've been given a set of circumstances that you don't really like, and sometimes you get complacent in that, and you feel like there's no way out. And for me, that's kind of been where I might dislike something about myself, and other people may pick up on it, but I feel like I can't escape that, and that it's just a part of me, and I don't make steps to change it, and that causes the insecurity to build up.
Sushant?
Yeah, to me, an insecurity is a generally irrational fear of being judged or being criticized by others. And ultimately, I think it stems from worrying about how we're perceived by others and a general lack of self confidence.
Yeah, I think those are all really good definitions. And I thought, Kabir, your definition was really interesting, like the lack of choice, right? Because as humans, we want to have control and feel like whatever work we put in, we can overcome our obstacles. And when you feel like you can't, it almost takes away a piece of what I think actually like makes you human, which is your resilience and your ability to overcome obstacles. And that kind of leads us into our next segment or the second segment of this episode, which is how our insecurities developed. And I also want to start by recognizing something that Sushant said is that it's an irrational fear. And if you think about it, when we come into this world as humans, we're inherently confident as children. As you can probably imagine, like little kids saying like the craziest things with like the most confidence, right? Those are just anecdotal examples. But really, over time, only external factors cause us to question our self-worth. I watched a TED Talk recently with Chantel Anderson, a recent WNBA player, who said that she came into the world obviously very confident, but the only reason she developed insecurities is because just from her perspective about not thinking she was beautiful, which is one of her insecurities, is because she would look at pictures of people who society would say are beautiful, and she said she didn't look like them. So over time, she developed those insecurities. So I think calling it irrational is a very, very accurate description.
Mhm. In terms of like how my insecurities have developed, I feel like something you said, Ben, already kind of really hits home for me. I think just the lack of Asian American representation, I think, in the media, at school sometimes, and not just the lack of it, but the lack of positive Asian American representation, I think that has kind of led me to develop somewhat of an insecurity of being Asian American. And that's kind of something that I've been struggling with, but I've also been working on. I can share my strategies for that. But I think definitely what you said, just the lack of representation from people like you in a positive light is something that kind of feeds those insecurities.
Mhm. For me, it's really been my main insecurity throughout my life has been the ability to like speak confidently, mostly in the classroom because when people are talking, you hear all these great ideas, and I mean, for me, it's been if my contributions are worth saying, or if people will perceive them as just being regurgitating what someone else has said, or if the ideas are good enough on their own. And so that insecurity is kind of developed. To go back to my original definition, it's for me, oftentimes I felt like it's out of my control. Like I just don't think that I have what it takes to be a good presenter, a good speaker. And, over time, I've had more opportunities to expand that skill. And when I feel like I have agency, like I feel like I have the ability to improve, that insecurity kind of becomes less significant because I don't really perceive that as being some unchangeable circumstance that I have no control over. But if I didn't have that choice, if I felt like it was just put upon me and there's nothing I could do, that lets the insecurity build. And yeah.
Yeah, so Sean, not to put you on, the spot, are there any, insecurities, things that you think would be meaningful to share?
Yeah, I think one of my biggest insecurities is just like a pressure I have for myself to kind of fit in. So I'm involved in a lot of different circles and groups in high school, and in each one there's like a different vibe and different kind of personality that is expected almost. And I kind of feel this pressure to adjust who I am to kind of fit into each of those, because I kind of want to be perceived as as the kind of model type of person that fits into those circles, if that makes sense. So that kind of insecurity where I'm always trying to fit in, that's something that I think needs to be worked on in my own life, where I'm kind of more positive about just the way I am and kind of accept that, and rather than having the circles shape me, kind of have my personality shape the way that I approach other groups and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
definitely. And I have a question, a follow-up question for that. Do you feel kind of when you're dealing with your insecurities with these different groups, like let's say, like I know Sushant, like you're involved obviously in DECA, which is a business club at our school.
yep,
And what's one other thing you're involved in, right? Just as
Matt.
yeah, math team. So I can speak from experience in that I can say that those two clubs probably demand different personalities, and I'm sure all of our listeners too can imagine that as well. But do you feel almost that even when you have success, right? Like adjusting your personality to fit in with those different groups, and you do fit in, and you do become a leader. Does it almost feel, I guess, for lack of better words, like more painful to adjust and being your true self and not being like the ultimate, like you said, role model for that group or leader, but not being yourself.
Yeah, I wouldn't say painful. I would almost say like taxing. Like it
Right.
takes a lot of effort to like maintain this. I'm not gonna say I maintain an artificial personality, but it does. I'm always thinking about like how I'm gonna be perceived by others, and to to have that constantly in my mind, that requires like a lot of effort. And so in that sense it definitely is painful and taxing, and that's why like I think that I need to just go with who I am and kind of just accept that, um so I can so I am so I'm not putting that much effort into kind of creating this superficial um
Yeah.
facade and
Yeah.
whatnot.
I think like Dushant, out of all the high schoolers I know, you're definitely the one who's just very involved, very bright kid. And I just think, how you said that you have all these different spheres or like groups of people that you have to kind of change your personality to be around. I think like, that can be very taxing. Um, and I think, it's for someone like you that that's a good thing, right? Because you have a lot of different skills and talents. And I think you can still, fit in with all these different groups. You just have to keep in mind that some groups just like for anyone listening, right? Some groups or people just may not be the best for you when it comes to being your true self and your true identity. And,
Right.
at school, there's a lot of positive groups, right? But I know outside school, there's a lot of different circles that teens can get involved in that might be negative and might make them, change who they actually are. I think the second you're really starting to change your identity and it's taking a toll on your mental health, that's kind of when you need to scale back. So I think obviously it's a balance, but it's definitely possible, right? So,
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a solid skill to have, where you're adapting to the environment, um, to have a sort of social intelligence, emotional intelligence. But at the same time, you kind of have to realize when you're kind of taking it too far. And right now, I'm not at that stage because I do enjoy my time in all of these clubs. But I am self-aware of the fact that there are times when I'm changing the way I act towards some groups.
Yeah, and I think that kind of is an important perspective for a lot of listeners to hear, right? Because when you see, you know, not to, over compliment you, Sushant, I don't know, hope that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, right? When you see guys like Sushant, right, who are leaders in all these different clubs and having success in all those different areas, a lot of people I think can feel insecure about that. And we talk about comparison a lot and how it's so damaging to mental health. But, it's important, I think, for people to hear that, you know, even for somebody who's so successful in all of these clubs, like they find it taxing, right? They find that they have to change things, change their personality even as well to, I guess, fit in, right? And it's not like all natural ability, right? So and that kind of plays into, right, these insecurities being irrational because it doesn't just happen naturally that you find success in all these clubs. It comes with that taxing experience as well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
the idea of, like, performing in different sets of situations or different environments, that has also been kind of a fuel of insecurity in my own life. Um, you know, at Glenbrook North, even within classes, I feel the need to do that because, in some crowds there, the kind of language people use is really, really different from, my English class, between English and, like, physics, for example. People like academy, which is an English program, a history program, people talk a certain way. They use very academic language when making contributions in class, and sometimes I feel like I have to adjust the way I speak, not as so as not to be perceived as kind of an outsider to that group. And that I think that's just a very relatable feeling among many teenagers, that they feel that the need to perform differently in different environments so that they can, have the perception of being inside that group rather than being considered outside that group.
Yeah. And as we kind of wrap up the segment of how insecurities have developed in our own lives, I want to talk about mine because I do think the one that I've experienced, maybe differently than others, is pretty common, and that's social anxiety, right? Which I've experienced very bad for my whole life. I hate bringing this up, and it's becoming sort of like a recurring thing that I'm going into this story. But, if you look at pictures of me, right, as a little kid, like I was the kid in like the preschool classroom who was kind of like in the corner, like wearing headphones, like playing, like, in my own world. And to some extent, right, that's like who I am today. But really, where the insecurity came in is when that kind of I guess, facade or personality that I was showing people that I had in the classroom led to people treating me a different way, right? Now, like when I was playing in the corner, I was happy, I was in my own world, and I could have friends outside and talk to people when I wanted to. But I think people assumed that, I didn't want to talk to anybody, I didn't want to be involved socially at all. And then that kinda stuck with me. I was like, "Maybe I'm not capable of that at all." And throughout elementary school, throughout middle school, and even throughout high school, I've sort of been, in that shell of thinking, and worrying about what people will think of me because they did and expressed that they judged me in that way when I was so young. So I think and obviously that, and I know in my head, right, that that's irrational, and that obviously people are not don't care enough to pay attention to, if I'm like socially awkward or anything like that, but I still think about it so much. So that's something I'm personally working on, and I'm sure a lot of other people are too. And I guess my message to people like that is, um just even me, even though I know it's irrational, I never like look at somebody like myself and would judge them or think anything like that. So, and my message, I guess, to myself or anybody who's struggling with that would just be to push yourself out there and try and push your comfort level.
Mhm. Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about our own insecurities and how they've developed, but we like ending each episode with at least 10 minutes of just talking about um, strategies to get better at whatever we're talking about and kind of like coping mechanisms. So for me, it kind of goes off of what Ben was saying. I think a good thing to keep in mind is that you're your worst critic, right? So the way you think about yourself sometimes can definitely be skewed from what other people think about you. And for me, going back to my example, I feel like I have kind of developed some internalized like racism in a sense because I feel like when I walk into a room, the first thing people see about me is not anything but me being Asian American. And I feel like I've kind of internalized some idea that's a negative thing, right? And I feel like I'm so self-conscious about that. But the reality is, all those people in the room, when I walk into the room, will probably notice something else, right? And it's just trying to keep in mind that you can be very critical of yourself, but your environment is not. And realizing that has really helped me.
Mhm. I mean, generally speaking, I think one of the best ways to kind of cope with an insecurity is to kind of realize that there is a way out, and that is building confidence in areas besides the thing you're insecure in. So, going back to the idea of choice, I think for me, insecurity has really festered when I've felt helpless in my situation, when I feel like there's no kind of solution to that. And although you might not be able to change the circumstances in your life or your choices or your actions that have led up to you being the person who you are, I think there is a lot to be said about finding, passions and pursuing them in other areas as to build confidence in that as opposed to kind of lurking in I don't know, the despair of whatever you're being insecure about, right? So, for me, um, I, found like music composition to be a really good way to kind of escape my insecurity of public speaking. It's a very good way to, find creative expression while also not being under that constant pressure to like perform in a certain environment or to speak a certain way. And so building confidence in that, I think, is what's really helped me alleviate the idea of alleviate the feeling of insecurity.
Yeah, if I had to offer one piece of advice, it would be to be the first person to, make fun of yourself almost. And a lot of times that can show you how like little people think about what you're insecure about. So if you make like a little like joke about yourself about something insecure that you're insecure about, I think you'll find a lot of times that people might like brush it off, giggle for a second, and you'll realize like they weren't even like thinking about that, and it sort of gives you this this confidence that it gives you that choice back that you were talking about, Kabir. Like people are not focusing on this. I have control back, and I can contribute now. And I also, before I let other people talk, I've been talking a lot, but and it, we before we sorry before another person talks, I wanted to talk about one more common insecurity that people have and sort of reiterate this message because I think it's one that people suffer in the darkness a lot through. Me and Kabir a couple months ago recorded an episode on eating disorders, which is one of the most stigmatized topics in all of mental health. You very, very rarely people, opening up about that, and people like it's almost like it's almost taboo to even like mention that. Um, so I just want to give a voice to like people who are struggling with that. Obviously, me and Kabir talked about like our own struggles and experience with that in that episode, but I want people to know who are struggling with that they're not alone and they can find help as well.
Sushant, do you have any like um, tips to like
Yeah.
kind of start overcoming insecurities?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess this isn't really specific to um my experience with insecurity, the experience that I talked about, but um in general, when I was a younger kid, there were a lot of things that I'd just be embarrassed of, like completely irrational, but embarrassed of. And what my mom would kind of say to keep in mind was, if you're not doing anything wrong, then why are you embarrassed? And so she kind of instilled that in me from a young age, where I kind of took a step back and was thinking about the action that I did, and if it was morally correct, like if there was nothing wrong in what I was doing and there was no need to feel shame or be embarrassed. Like when I was like 4 or 5, I'd be like wearing these Indian clothes to in public, after I went to a gathering and whatnot, and I'd like be scared to like get out of the car and whatnot. And so that's like a small experience, but for a 4-year old, it can kind of be hard to hard to it's easy to feel embarrassed as a 4-year old. And so what my mom kind of said was, if you aren't doing anything wrong, then there's no need to feel like other people are judging you. And so that's what I've tried to keep in my mind since then. Whenever I'm in like situations where I feel like there are a lot of eyes on me, I just know that if I have like a moral compass, if I know like what I'm doing is correct, then I don't need external validation from others.
Hmm. Yeah, and another, Sushant said that's some advice from his mom. Something that my mom tells me sometimes is that insecure people make others feel insecure, right? So it really starts with your environment. Like someone who's insecure and don't, someone who doesn't feel good about themselves will make sure the people around them feels the same way because they don't want to be the only one who's struggling with that. But if you surround yourself with confident people and people who are proud in who they are and confident, I think that helped you to kind of become your environment and be confident too. So I think it also really starts with the people you surround yourself with. Um, yeah, that's something I have too.
Yeah, and I said that a good strategy is like making fun of yourself. I don't mean like, like berating yourself in an unhealthy way, just like, playfully, right? Because a lot of times that like alleviates the stress. But I also think like, like we're doing, almost like opening up about your insecurities to those who are close to you and developing like a relationship and a connection with somebody who also might have a similar insecurity can be very powerful, because I think a lot of, in my experience, when I've done that, you almost realize together like that it is irrational, and figure out ways to um, improve and regain the confidence that you may have lost.
I think something else, you know, broadly speaking, right, a lot of insecurity comes from the feeling of being different from everyone around you, right? And I think, of course, there's this social pressure to fit in, but kind of cultivating like a sense of strength and like those fundamental qualities about yourself, like why exactly does being different mean being inferior? And I think that's something, everyone really, subtly considers, but really I think making that a point of actual, bring that to the front of your mind. Why do you feel like your difference is holding you back from, fitting in, or not fitting, but like why is it, holding back your mental health? I think something that, really helps me do that is learning about, the particular trait, like learning about that part of myself and kind of finding others who share that characteristic, and just building confidence in that part that maybe you feel less, secure about, maybe other people kind of criticize you for, but like the idea of having that characteristic itself is something unique, and I think there's a strength to that uniqueness in a social setting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like embracing differences and going back to my own experiences, sort of being socially isolated, right? I embraced that and said, look, I'm different than all these like other kids, who are like going and hanging out and doing all that. And what I really like is like science and computers and things like that. And I really like focused on that, and I embraced that, and I've found like success in that. And I think that's given me more confidence. Like, they have their things that they like, and I have my things, that I like. So embracing those differences is really important. And I'll remind you, and I'll remind like for anybody listening, like the most successful people in the world saw things differently, had a different vision than anybody else, kind of going against the grain. And these successful people were able to build empires, really, whether it's in business, whether it's you know in innovation or anything like that, by seeing things differently, by maybe overcoming an insecurity.
Yeah. And Ben, you mentioned embracing differences, but I think equally important is to embrace similarities as well. So like when you're in a new environment, you have to realize that all of us have a similarity. Like the first thing that um a person sees, like Ethan, you mentioned, like they think that you're an Asian American. That's the first thing that they notice. Maybe not. Maybe it's something that you share together. Maybe you're in a math class, and maybe it's the love for math that you have together.
Mhm.
And so, looking for those similarities, that kind of helps you. That may kind of reduce the antagonizing feeling that you feel that's coming from others. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So like as we close out here, I just want to remind everyone just like one more thing. I know we mentioned this a lot when it comes to these challenging mental health topics that you kind of need to work through on your own, but I just want to remind anyone who's listening that, these challenges that you have, don't feel discouraged by it, right? Because I know we reference this a ton, but life is kind of like a video game, right? And the more challenges you have and you overcome, right, the success at the end is sweeter. And I just want, as discouraging as it may feel and challenging as it may feel to kind of work on your insecurities, right? It's worth doing because in the end, the person you'll grow into is worth all the struggle that you'll experience beforehand. But yeah, that's all we have for today. Ben, Kabir, any updates coming up in terms of new episodes?
Yeah, so Mind Matters actually this week, you can look out. It's going to be featured on, in the next coming week, it's going to be featured on local Chicago TV stations, Fox and
Yeah.
WG. So, we'll be talking like a lot about our experience and how other mental health advocates out there can um, be vulnerable and help break the stigma. So that'll be a really cool experience. Like I almost can't even believe that, you know, that's happening when we started this as a radio show 2 or 3 years ago. So that's almost crazy to think about.
Mhm.
But we have a ton of episodes coming up. Next week we're featuring actually a person who I've worked with a lot, who runs the JCC Teen Mental Health Committee, and who's been a school counselor in many disadvantaged areas throughout her life. So that'll be a really cool episode, and that'll be in the next coming weeks. And Kabir, before I
Yeah. There's also in the future we're planning an episode with a professor of neuroscience. So we'll be on the lookout for that. I think it'll be a very beneficial episode, not just to know about kind of the experiential stuff, the day to day stuff relating to mental health, but also the science behind it, which is fascinating. And I think it'll benefit everyone to learn about why the brain functions as it does. And with that neuroscientist's lens or perspective, I think that could really, enrich our conversation.
Yeah, and lastly, before we finish off, I want to say a huge thanks to Sushant today for coming on the episode and being vulnerable to talk about mental health. And as podcasters, right, we've had people come and joke to us about what we talk about on the podcast, even the fact that we're doing it. So it's very commendable to come on and be vulnerable, and we all really really appreciate that. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
of course. No, I appreciate you having me on. It's been nice kind of talking to you about this stuff, and it's a really important issue. And it's great what you guys are doing. So thank you guys as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're just gonna, we might have another episode in the future with another high schooler, but I think it's just, we interviewed a lot of counselors and therapists, but I think having high schoolers on the podcast is very beneficial because, that's kind of our target audience, and that will really help break the stigma. But if you're curious in how you can get into touch with Sushant, you can find him at DECA, Math Team, Peer Group. basically any AP class
Everything,
PBN
everything.
has to offer. But again,
Search
thank you,
up the club and
Sushant.
then search up who's the president of the club, and it'll be him.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how you can get into touch with him. But like I said, that's all the time we have for today. My name is Ethan,
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
and just remember, your mind matters.